Hello, thanks for joining me today for a quick update on the conflict in Ukraine and the Ukrainian incursion into Kursk, Russia. I'd like to start off with an acknowledgement that during my last update I became a bit overcritical and maybe even a bit judgmental. Moving forward, I would want to keep these updates as unbiased and legitimate as possible. Today I want to start by discussing Ukraine's President Zelensky's petition to Western powers for the complete authorization to use long-range ballistic missiles for deep attacks into Russia. Specifically, Zelensky is asking for full permission to use the MGM-140 Army Tactical Missile System, or the ATACMS, ground-launched ballistic missile, which were first supplied to Ukraine in March of this year. They possess a range of about 190 miles, and that also would include his petition to use the British Storm Shadow air-launched cruise missile systems for offensive operations into Russia. Zelensky claims that the attacks would be directed at Russian airfields to neutralize air bases and air assets, which would reduce or cripple Russia's air capability. One example would be the Tu-160 supersonic strategic bomber. Russian forces know this and have very recently moved all airframes to deeper areas within Russia, so all are reported to be at least 900 kilometers to the rear from the LD in Ukraine. As the Storm Shadow has a 550 kilometer range and the ATACMS Block 2 a 300 kilometer range, many analysts feel that Zelensky may now be targeting military bases, or intending to target military bases, communication stations, logistics centers, and perhaps even production facilities. In some respects, these strikes, especially the production facilities, would be seen as a strike at the Russian heartland, and that may generate a pretty severe response. These strikes would be at good operational level targets, as they would force Russia to shift troops and resources to the defense of this very broad area. The added strain for Russian forces would be significant, so the value that these strikes provide would be worth it. But of course the problem is that these weapon systems are from the United States and Britain. So you have to see how this looks from Putin's viewpoint. An analogy that I've heard from a few analysts is this: imagine if a rogue state provided Mexican drug cartels ballistic missiles, and the Mexican drug cartels then fired these missiles into Texas or Arizona, and U.S. citizens were killed or injured. Would U.S. authorities pursue a course of action against the rogue state providing the missiles to Mexican drug cartels? Well, we all know the answer. Of course they would. I absolutely feel that U.S. policy supporting Ukraine and the defense of Ukraine is absolutely correct. The course of action that they have chosen along with NATO should continue to be that to defend Ukraine. However, I do not feel that U.S. or NATO assets, especially long-range ballistic missiles, should be authorized for use by Ukraine to strike targets deep inside Russia. In my opinion, this authorization would take the U.S. down a dark road of escalation, one that the American people may be surprised to find leads to the unthinkable. We have to remember that Russia holds half of the global stockpile of nuclear warheads. Now, I understand that the morally right thing to do is to help Ukraine, but unfortunately my opinion is that not at all costs. There is a calculus that factors in the safety and security of the Western Hemisphere. Now, I fully support U.S. weapons being used to support the defense of Ukraine once again, and even mechanized and ground equipment in the Kursk region. So the latest is that as of yesterday, August 28th, or 2 days ago, U.S. defense officials have indicated that they are not planning to change their policy, but will continue to work with Ukraine in the defensive campaign. Multiple reports from Western media indicate that the U.S. government is prohibiting the UK from allowing Ukraine to use Storm Shadow missiles to strike military targets in Russia. Now for updates from the last 24 hours. Ukrainian forces conducted drone strikes against oil infrastructure in the Rostov Oblast. On August 28th, Ukrainian Special Operations Forces conducted a strike with Ukrainian-made drones against the Atlas oil depot in the Rostov Oblast. The Atlas oil depot is part of the Russian Defense Industrial Base and supplies Russian forces. On the Eastern Front, Russian forces have accelerated advances along the Western Periphery front line. It's becoming quite apparent at this point that responding to Ukraine's Kursk incursion has not impacted Russian advances on the Eastern Front. Russia seems to be shifting forces from the Black Sea Fleet in Crimea, along with VDV elements, to lead conscripts in the Kursk region, while keeping currently assigned Russian formations fighting in the east. Russian forces recently advanced southeast of Kupiansk. Here's Kupiansk right here. So now we'll make our way down the front line to the next hotly contested urban area. The next town that's been hotly contested is the town of Toretsk. And as you can see here, they've actually entered the town of Toretsk right here on the northeast area. Russians have moved into Toretsk with less resistance than expected. Here's Pokrovsk. Directly southeast of Pokrovsk is the area that the Russians have entered, and it's been the hotly contested area. Horodivka, you can see the neighborhood right here has been completely enveloped. It's being talked about a lot lately because it's one of those tactical objectives that's really an operational one. The Pokrovsk objective could even be strategic depending on the argument being made. This would be a significant foothold and operational victory for Russian forces. I would like to think that the reduced engagement by Ukrainians as of late is by design, one would hope, and that they're employing a non-engagement strategy. A non-engagement strategy is one where land is traded for time. So it means that in retreat, in the face of a strong enemy, is not a sign of weakness, but of strength. So by resisting the temptation to respond to an aggressor, you buy yourself valuable time. That's the time to recover, to think, and to gain perspective. Then there's an area just right here, Seldo. It's a small neighborhood, or it could be a hamlet, village. I'm not sure what the term is, but it's a small area. That's another hotly contested area. And then finally, the last hotly contested area along the eastern front is just northeast of Vuhledar. You can see this right here. And it's, as you can see, there's a lot of inland waterways and small tributaries. Now up to Kharkov Oblast. Takes a second for the map to render. It's a little bit slow today. We'll go up north here to Kharkiv, and nothing significant to report here. Both sides are dug in and conducting daily harassment. No significant gains either here in Lipsy or in Ternova. And there's Ternova. And lastly, we'll move up to the Kursk Oblast. The intensity of the fighting there has slowed as Ukrainian forces dig in and fortify select areas. Some reports have indicated that Koronevo may be a failed objective for the Ukrainian forces. Looking back and seeing that the Kursk offensive hasn't really yielded what the Ukrainians wanted, and that was to pull Russian forces from the Eastern Front, it's getting more and more difficult to not play Monday morning quarterback, but here goes. If anyone remembers Clausewitz and his theory of war, they used to teach that to us second lieutenants, but anyways, he was a Prussian general and military theorist in the early 1800s. Some of his basic teachings may be relevant when reviewing the Kursk offensive, and that is that secondary operations are generally not a good idea unless you can satisfy the 3 R's. That is reward, risk, and resources. With this in mind, it's looking more and more like Ukrainian forces should have kept their focus on the Eastern Front and mounted a counteroffensive there. The risk from this incursion may be the most harmful effect of this counteroffensive incursion into Kursk, because it's starting to look like they took their eye off the ball in the Eastern Front. And the very last thing is I'd like to report on an important new Russian capability, and that is the Russian Ministry of Defense is reportedly supporting the creation of a new type of combat unit that will specialize in using and countering drones, unmanned systems, and other electronic equipment in the occupied Oblast of Zaporizhia. So here's Zaporizhia right here. This is where they're going to stand up the unit. An important Russian capability to look out for. Anyways, I will go ahead and close with that. I like to keep these updates at about 10 minutes or less. Otherwise, it's not really a brief, is it? Anyways, thanks for watching. I appreciate your patronage, and leave a comment or recommendation, and see you next time.
This time. 10.2. Back in. That was 10.2 for 2.
Ça marche. Tu peux lui donner le...
Clippers, Fab 37, we count at
This turn coming. There's this thing. 10.2, back in. Back. It was 10.2 for 2.